The massive diplomatic vessel of the Galactic Council cut through space like a silver knife, its polished hull reflecting the distant starlight. Inside the ship's main observation deck, Ambassador Gray stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching Earth grow larger in the viewing screen. His tall, slender frame cast a long shadow across the pristine floor, and his pale blue skin seemed to glow under the soft lighting. "What a primitive world," he murmured to his assistant, watching the blue-green planet spin slowly before them. "They only achieved faster-than-light travel last year, and already they demand a council meeting." His assistant, a shorter being named Reed, checked the data on his tablet. "They are unusual, Ambassador. Their development pattern doesn't match any known species. They colonized 3 solar systems without FTL technology." Gray turned his head slightly, his large eyes blinking in surprise. "Without FTL? How is that possible?" "They used something called generation ships, massive vessels that took hundreds of years to reach their destinations." "Fascinating," Gray said, though his tone suggested more confusion than admiration. "Such persistence for such little gain." The ship's AI announced their approach to Earth's space station. Gray straightened his formal robes, preparing for humanity's first official contact with the Galactic Council. As the highest-ranking diplomat in the core worlds, he had overseen 57 first contact scenarios. Each followed a predictable pattern. The new species would be overwhelmed, eager to please, and readily accept their place in the galactic hierarchy. The docking procedure went smoothly, and Gray led his delegation through the connecting tunnel. He had expected a crude, utilitarian structure. Instead, they entered a gleaming diplomatic hall that rivaled some of the better council facilities. More surprising were the humans themselves. Admiral Steele waited at the head of the human delegation. He was a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes, wearing a crisp white uniform adorned with simple medals. What struck Gray was the complete lack of awe or nervousness in the human's bearing. Steele stood as if meeting old friends rather than representatives of a civilization thousands of years more advanced than his own. "Welcome to Earth Station 1, Steele said, his voice steady and confident. "We trust your journey was pleasant." Gray had to check his translator to ensure it was working correctly. New species usually babbled in excitement or fear during first contact. These humans were different. "The journey was adequate," Gray replied, using the formal diplomatic phrase that established his superior position. "We have come to evaluate your species for potential membership in the Galactic Council." Steele smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course. Though I should mention that we're here to evaluate the Council as well. Membership is, after all, a two-way street." Gray's assistant nearly dropped his tablet. In thousands of years of Council history, no new species had ever suggested they might reject membership. The very idea was impossible. "Perhaps," Gray said carefully, "you don't understand the honor being offered. The Council represents over 300 species. Our technology, our knowledge, is impressive," Steele interrupted smoothly, "as is our own achievement of reaching the stars. Shall we begin the cultural exchange?" Gray felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: uncertainty. These humans should be overwhelmed by the Council's power and technology. Instead, they acted like equals. Worse, they seemed amused by the whole situation. As they walked toward the conference room, Gray noticed something else disturbing. The human security personnel carried no visible weapons, yet moved with absolute confidence. It reminded him of apex predators, secure in their ability to handle any threat. "Tell me, Admiral," Gray said, trying to regain control of the situation, "how does your species view its place in the galaxy?" Steele paused at the conference room door. "That's an interesting question, Ambassador. I suppose we view it the same way we view everything else, as full of possibilities waiting to be explored." He gestured to the open door. "After you." Gray entered the room, his mind racing. In all his years of diplomacy, he had never encountered a species quite like this. Something told him that this first contact would not follow the usual pattern. He had no idea just how right he was. 3 days into the evaluation process, Ambassador Gray sat in his private chamber aboard the council ship, staring at the data screens with growing concern. His assistant Reed stood nearby, adding more troubling information to their report. "I don't understand these readings," Gray said, his pale blue fingers tapping the screen. "How did they manage to build colonies on Mars and Venus? Both planets were completely unsuitable for life." Reed scrolled through more data. "They changed the planets, Ambassador. They call it terraforming. They're still working on Venus, but Mars now has breathable air in its major cities." Gray leaned back in his chair. The humans had done something that the Council had declared impossible centuries ago. Yet they had done it without advanced technology, using only determination and clever engineering. "Show me their military history," Gray ordered, trying to understand these strange beings better. The screens filled with images that made both aliens step back in shock. Wars that engulfed entire continents. Battles fought in trenches, in deserts, in frozen wastelands. Humans fighting on despite injuries that should have killed them. "They're savages," Reed whispered. "No," Gray said slowly. "They're survivors. Look at what happened after each war. They rebuilt. They made peace with their enemies. They learned and grew stronger." He pointed to more recent data. "And now they haven't had a major war in 50 years. A message flashed on their screen. One of their junior diplomats, Pine, had discovered something in the human archives. Gray opened the file and began reading. "This can't be right," he muttered. "Reed, look at these projects. They built a tunnel under their largest ocean. They created artificial islands. They sent people to their moon using computers less powerful than our food replicators." Reed checked another file. "Ambassador, you need to see this. It's their response to being told something is impossible." The screen showed countless examples throughout human history. When told they couldn't fly, they built flying machines. When told they couldn't reach space, they strapped themselves to rockets. When told they couldn't survive in space, they built stations and colonies. "Fascinating," Gray said. "They don't just ignore impossibility. They take it as a challenge." Their discussion was interrupted by Admiral Steele, who appeared on their communication screen. "Ambassador, I hope I'm not disturbing you. We've prepared a demonstration of our terraforming technology on Venus. Would you care to observe?" Gray agreed, and soon they were watching a live feed from Venus. Massive machines moved across the hot surface, transforming the poisonous atmosphere into breathable air. The process should have taken centuries. The humans were doing it in decades. "Impressive, isn't it?" Steele said, that same calm smile on his face. "Many said it was impossible. We took that as a suggestion rather than a fact." There was that word again, impossible. Gray noticed how Steele's eyes lit up when he said it, like a predator spotting prey. "Admiral," Gray said carefully, "why did your people attempt such a dangerous and difficult project?" Steele's smile widened slightly. "Because it was there, Ambassador. Because we could. Because everyone said it couldn't be done." He paused. "Will that be included in your assessment of humanity?" Gray felt a chill run down his spine. In just 3 days, everything he thought he knew about developing species had been questioned. These humans didn't just overcome obstacles, they actively sought them out. As Steele's image disappeared from the screen, Gray turned to Reed. "Update the report. Mark humanity as a Type C civilization, but add a special note. They require careful diplomatic handling. And most importantly," he took a deep breath, "never tell them something is impossible." Reed nodded, adding the warning to their report. Neither of them realized that this was just the beginning of humanity's impact on galactic society. The emergency meeting of the Galactic Council was called just 2 weeks after first contact. Ambassador Gray stood before the gathered representatives of 300 species, his usual confidence shaken. On the main display behind him, a map showed human ships facing off against vessels of the Drift Collective near the Edgeworlds. The situation is unprecedented, Gray explained to the council. The Drift Collective claims ownership of the Edgeworlds based on their 1,000-year presence in the region. However, humans have already established mining operations on 3 planets there. The council leader, an ancient being called Old Stone, leaned forward. How did they establish these operations without our knowledge? They sent automated mining ships 20 years ago, long before they developed FTL travel, Gray replied. The ships arrived last year. The humans simply followed them once they had FTL capability. Murmurs filled the chamber. No species had ever dared to expand without council permission. Yet these humans had done it before even making contact. The Drift Collective's representative, a crystalline being, rose to speak. We have issued an ultimatum. The humans must leave or face our fleet. We have 10,000 ships in the region. They have 50. The crystal being's voice carried a smug tone. It is impossible for them to win. Gray felt his blood freeze. There was that word again. On the emergency channel, Admiral Steele's image appeared. He looked as calm as ever, despite the fleet of enemy ships facing his small force. Admiral, Old Stone spoke, you must withdraw. The Drift Collective's claim is valid under council law. Moreover, their fleet outnumbers yours by 200 to 1. Victory is impossible. Those watching closely saw a slight smile appear on Steele's face. Impossible. That's an interesting choice of words. He straightened in his chair. Let me tell you a story about human history. In 1940, a small island nation faced an enemy that outnumbered them greatly. Everyone said their survival was impossible. Instead of giving up, they fought back. And they won. That was on your planet, the Drift representative said. This is space warfare. You don't have the ships, the weapons, or the experience, though. We have something better, Steele interrupted. We have imagination. And we have a very interesting response to being told something is impossible. He looked directly at Gray. Isn't that right, Ambassador? Gray stepped forward quickly. Council, I strongly advise we reconsider. Enough, Old Stone declared. Admiral Steele, you have 1 hour to withdraw your ships, or the Council will support the Drift Collective's right to remove you by force. Steele's smile grew slightly wider. I understand. And since you've declared our victory impossible, let me share another thing about humanity. He leaned forward. We never show all our cards at once. The transmission ended. Gray turned to the Council, his voice urgent. We must stop this now. You don't understand what you've done by using that word. What we've done? Old Stone asked. We've simply stated a fact. Their victory is impossible. Their ships are outnumbered. Their weapons are inferior. Their defeat is certain. Gray looked at the tactical display, watching the human ships. They weren't retreating. Instead, they were forming a new pattern he hadn't seen before. No, he whispered. Their ships aren't in a defensive formation. They're attacking. The chamber erupted in laughter. The idea that 50 ships would attack 10,000 was absurd, impossible. But as they watched, the human ships began to move. And in that moment, Gray realized something that would soon change the galaxy forever. Humans didn't just ignore the impossible. They took it as a personal challenge to prove the universe wrong. The battle that followed would make history, and the word impossible would never be the same again. The council chamber fell silent as they watched the tactical display. 50 human ships moved toward the massive Drift Collective fleet, their formation tight and purposeful. Ambassador Gray couldn't look away, even though he expected to witness a massacre. They're insane, the Drift representative said, their crystalline form glittering with amusement. Watch how quickly this ends. The first shots came from the Drift fleet, 10,000 energy beams lighting up space. But something strange happened. The human ships didn't explode. Instead, the beams seemed to bend around them, like water flowing around rocks. Impossible, the Drift representative shouted. They've developed energy deflection shields. That technology is beyond them. Admiral Steele's voice came through the comm system. You know, that's twice now you've used that word. We really should thank you. It's very motivating. Suddenly, the human ships released what looked like small black dots into space, thousands of them, spreading out between their ships and the drift fleet. What are those? Old Stone demanded. Humans call them mines, Gray explained, reading the data. But these are different. They're moving. The black dots spread through space like a swarm of insects, each one powered by a tiny engine. The drift fleet fired at them, but there were too many. When the dots reached the drift ships, they didn't explode. Instead, they attached themselves to the hulls. A minor annoyance, the drift representative said. They're too small to cause damage. Steele's voice came again, sounding almost cheerful. Those aren't weapons. They're windows. Windows? Gray asked, confused. Yes, windows into normal space. You see, we discovered something interesting about your fancy faster-than-light drives. They need stable space to work, so we created devices that force small areas back into normal space, right where your engines are. One by one, the drift ships began to lose power, their FTL drives, trying to operate in conflicting space conditions, shut down to prevent explosion. In less than 5 minutes, 9,000 ships were dead in space. The remaining 1,000 drift ships tried to retreat, but the humans had positioned themselves perfectly. More black dots swarmed out, and more ships went dark. This is outrageous, the drift representative shouted. This kind of warfare is impossible. These tactics violate natural law. There's that word again, Steele said. You really should be more careful with it. His fleet moved forward, now clearly targeting the drift command ships. Would you like to surrender now, or would you prefer to see what else we've been keeping secret? The drift representative looked at their tactical display, where ship after ship was going dark. Their mighty fleet, reduced to floating metal in less than 10 minutes, without a single explosion or loss of life. We surrender, they said quietly. In the council chamber, no one spoke. They had just watched 50 ships defeat 10,000 without destroying a single vessel. The humans hadn't just won. They had done it while showing mercy to their enemies. Gray stepped forward. Admiral Steele, your victory is impressive. But surely this technology, these tactics, you must have been preparing them for years. Steele's image appeared on the main screen, still sitting calmly in his command chair. Actually, we developed these devices last week, after your council mentioned that word impossible. Nothing motivates human engineers quite like being told something can't be done. Old Stone's voice shook slightly. Last week, you created this technology in 1 week. Of course, Steele replied. And we have plenty more ideas. Would you like to tell us what else is impossible? We do enjoy a good challenge. The council chamber remained silent. In one battle, humanity had changed the balance of power in the galaxy. But more importantly, they had taught everyone a vital lesson. Never tell humans something is impossible, because somehow, some way, they would prove you wrong. 1 month after the battle with the Drift Collective, Ambassador Gray stood before the council again. His hand shook slightly as he read from his data tablet. The situation is growing, complex, he said. Word of the battle has spread throughout the galaxy. Every species now knows how 50 human ships defeated 10,000 enemies without causing a single death. Old Stone shifted uncomfortably in his ancient chair. What are the consequences? Gray changed the display to show a map of known space. Red dots appeared across it, marking locations of recent events. The mountain clans said it was impossible for humans to mine their asteroid fields. 3 days later, humans developed robots that could withstand the intense radiation there. He pointed to another dot. The Deep Space Guild claimed humans couldn't navigate the storm regions. Now human ships are mapping safe routes through them. Reed, now promoted to senior assistant, added more data to the display. The pattern makers declared their encryption impossible to break. Humans created a new type of computer that solved it in hours. The Star Shapers said their technology couldn't be improved. Humans showed them 3 ways to make it better. The council chamber filled with worried whispers. Every species had something they considered impossible. Now they all feared what would happen if they said that word around humans. A new face appeared on the main screen, Captain Swift of the Human Exploration Fleet. Unlike Admiral Steele's calm demeanor, she wore an excited grin. "Council members," she said, "we're happy to report success in the dead zone. Our ships have restored power to the ancient gates." The chamber erupted in chaos. The dead zone was a region of space where nothing worked, filled with mysterious gates built by a long-dead civilization. For 10,000 years, the Council had declared it impossible to activate them. "How?" Old Stone demanded. "How did you do it?" Swift's grin widened. "Well, someone told our engineers it was impossible. After that, it was just a matter of time." She checked her notes. "Took us about 2 weeks to figure it out." Gray watched the Council's reactions. Fear, amazement, and worry crossed their alien faces. Humans weren't just solving impossible problems. They were actively looking for them. "There's more," Reed said quietly. "Remember the mining platforms the humans set up in the edge worlds? They're not just mining. They're building something." "Building what?" Gray asked, though he dreaded the answer. "We don't know." When asked, they just smile and say it's a fun little project they thought up after someone said planetary construction was impossible in that region. The council leader's aide rushed in with an urgent message. Gray read it and felt his heart skip a beat. "The Drift Collective," he said slowly. "They're requesting human engineers to help improve their fleet. They say that after seeing humans solve the impossible, they want to learn from them." Old Stone looked around the chamber. "Are we seeing a pattern? Every time someone says humans can't do something, they take it as a challenge," Gray finished. "And they're getting faster at solving these challenges. The first solution took them a week. Now they're solving impossible problems in days." Captain Swift was still on the screen, her grin unchanged. "You know what the best part is? We're just getting started. There are so many impossible things left to try." The council members looked at each other nervously. They had ruled the galaxy by declaring what was and wasn't possible. Now humans were changing everything, one impossible solution at a time. "Should we try to stop them?" someone asked. Gray shook his head. "That would be impossible." He paused, realizing what he'd just said. "Oh no." On the screen, Swift's grin grew even wider. "Did someone just say impossible? Give us a few days. We'll show you something really interesting." The private meeting chamber of the Galactic Council was smaller than the main hall, but today it felt especially crowded. 50 of the most important species representatives gathered to hear Ambassador Gray's special report on humanity. After 6 months of study, Gray began, standing before the gathered leaders. "We finally understand why humans react so strongly to the word impossible." He touched a control, and images from Earth's history filled the screens. "Look at these moments from their past," he continued. "Humans flying for the first time, climbing their highest mountains, diving to their deepest oceans. In each case, someone told them it was impossible. And in each case, they proved that person wrong." Old Stone leaned forward. "But why? Why do they react this way?" Gray changed the display to show brain scans. "It's how their minds work. When we say something is impossible, we accept it as a fact. When humans hear it, they see it as a question to be answered." The screen showed more images: the first human spacecraft, their early computers, their medical advances. Each achievement had been declared impossible before it was done. "It's not just determination," Reed added, standing beside Gray. "It's excitement. Humans actually enjoy being told something is impossible. To them, it's not a barrier. It's an invitation to try something new." A new face appeared on the main screen. Professor Hall, a human scientist who had been working with the council. Unlike the military leaders they'd met before, she wore simple clothes and thick glasses. "May I add something?" she asked politely. When the council nodded, she continued, "You've all been looking at us like we're some kind of strange puzzle, but from our view, you're the strange ones." She adjusted her glasses. "You see something difficult and say, that's impossible, so we won't try. We see the same thing and say, that's impossible. Let's find out if that's true." The council members watched as she brought up her own displays, showing human research projects. Teams of scientists and engineers working day and night, driven by the excitement of trying something new. "Every time you tell us something is impossible," Hall explained, "you're giving us a new puzzle to solve. And we love puzzles. The harder, the better." Gray nodded slowly. "That's why they solved the dead zone gates so quickly, and why they're transforming the edge worlds. They're not trying to prove us wrong. They're having fun." The council chamber fell quiet as this idea sank in. They had thought humans were being aggressive or defiant. Instead, they were treating the galaxy's greatest challenges like an entertaining game. "There's more," Reed said, showing new data. "They're teaching other species to think this way." The Drift Collective's engineers are already starting to ask why not, instead of accepting impossibility. Old Stone stood up slowly. "Then we must make a decision. How do we handle a species that not only ignores our limitations but enjoys breaking them? And worse, teaches others to do the same?" Professor Hall smiled gently. "You could try telling us it's impossible to work together peacefully. We'd probably come up with something interesting." For the first time in the meeting, several council members laughed. The tension in the room eased slightly as they began to understand. Humans weren't a threat to the galaxy. They were its next great adventure. "I propose," Gray said, "that we create a new classification for humanity. Not as a warning, but as a recognition. They are the species that turns impossible into possible, not through power or technology, but through simple human curiosity." The council voted unanimously to approve this change. As they did, Professor Hall's smile grew wider. "Just wait until you see what we're working on next," she said. "Someone told us it was impossible to improve the council's voting system. We took that as a challenge." The council members looked at each other nervously. The galaxy was changing, one impossible solution at a time, and there was no going back. 10 years after first contact, Ambassador Gray stood in Earth's new galactic embassy, looking out at the impossible garden growing in space. Beautiful plants floated in zero gravity, their flowers blooming in colors that shouldn't exist in nature. Another human impossible project that had succeeded. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Admiral Steele said, walking up beside him. The Admiral had aged little in 10 years, though his hair was now completely white. "Someone told our botanists that plants couldn't grow in space without gravity. They took it as a challenge." Gray nodded, watching the floating flowers. "Of course they did. You know, that word has been officially banned from all diplomatic meetings now." "Banned?" Steele raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because every time someone says it, humans appear within days with a solution." Gray chuckled softly. "Last month, a junior diplomat told humans it was impossible to translate the ancient crystal songs. 3 days later, your linguists had not only translated them but were performing them in concert. They walked together through the embassy's halls. On every wall, screens showed human projects across the galaxy. The dead zone was now filled with active gates, connecting distant parts of space. The edge worlds had been transformed into garden planets. Even the Drift Collective's ships now used human technology. "Your report changed everything," Steele said. "Once the galaxy understood why we react to that word the way we do, they stopped seeing us as a threat." "Most of them, anyway," Gray replied. "Some species still fear you. They think you're too unpredictable, too willing to try new things." Steele stopped at a window overlooking Earth. "And what do you think, old friend?" Gray considered the question. In 10 years, he had watched humanity reshape the galaxy. They hadn't used weapons or threats. Instead, they had used curiosity, creativity, and that strange excitement they felt when facing impossible challenges. "I think," he said slowly, "that the galaxy needed you. We had become too comfortable with our limitations, too willing to accept that some things couldn't be done." A group of young aliens walked past them, wearing Earth University badges. After humans proved so good at solving impossible problems, other species had started sending their brightest students to learn the human way of thinking. "Did you see the latest project?" Steele asked, showing Gray his tablet. "The Star Shapers said it was impossible to build a bridge between galaxies. Our engineers got very excited about that." Gray looked at the plans and shook his head in amazement. "You're actually going to try it, aren't you?" "Try it. We've already started. Should be done in about 5 years." They reached the embassy's main hall, where representatives from hundreds of species gathered. In the center stood a simple display, the first message from the Drift Collective, with their fatal use of the word impossible. "We keep it there as a reminder," Steele explained, "of how one word changed everything." Gray touched the display gently. "Not the word itself," he corrected. "What it taught us about humanity. You never saw limitations, only possibilities waiting to be explored." Outside the embassy windows, ships from across the galaxy moved through space. Many of them used technology that had been impossible 10 years ago. All of them carried crews who had learned to question their limitations. "So," Steele said with a familiar smile, "what should we make possible next?" Gray looked at his old friend, remembering that first meeting when he had thought humans were primitive and predictable. He had never been so wrong about anything in his life. "Actually," he said, "I heard someone say it's impossible to teach a drift crystal to sing." Steele's eyes lit up with that familiar excitement, the excitement that had reshaped the galaxy, one impossible challenge at a time. "Really?" he said. "How fascinating. Let me make a few calls." Gray watched him leave, already gathering a team for the new challenge. In the garden outside, another impossible flower bloomed in the vacuum of space, proving once again that with humanity, nothing was truly impossible, just temporarily unsolved.